You know, one of our major themes or emphasis this year is creating or establishing wildlife habitats in our landscape or garden. And the reason for that is to attract birds and frogs and bats and other gardening-friendly critters that will help us reduce our insect problems, and therefore we probably won't have to use as many pesticides. Now, you don't have to have a large landscape or garden to do this. It can be a small one right in the middle of an urban area, and it can have a fence and everything, and you can design it to actually help influence those critters to come to your garden and landscape. Now, we're fortunate enough to have quite a bit of space, so we can be a little bit more creative in hauling bigger things in and plant selection. And the area that we're really going to focus on today is on the south side of our studio gardens, here on this row of cedars. Now, the neat thing about creating a wildlife habitat is that a lot of the things that we're going to plant specifically for birds have a lot of beautiful aesthetic, nice characteristics that fit in great for landscape too, such as flowers and fruits and nice foliage and bark, and we're going to show you how to do that. Now, to create a wildlife though, there's some really basic things you need to remember, and that is that birds, just like humans, need three basic things, and that's shelter or cover, which it's often referred to as food and water. And once you provide those things, you're going to have more birds come in. Now, also, when you're developing a landscape shelter or cover for the birds, you need to remember layering, and that's really very crucial. Really tall trees, then you want to have some medium-sized trees or shrubs, go all the way to smaller shrubs and even ground covers. And once you think about the layering effect of your landscape, it makes it a little bit easier. Now, the purpose of it is not only for shelter and protection, but for nesting. Also, some of them are going to provide food. Now, we're going to start out with our tall part of the plan with already established cedar trees that you see here. They're probably 30, maybe 40 feet tall. They've been here for years, but they're taking a beating pretty much too because of our recent snowstorm. We've had a lot of branch damage. We always try to leave the lower branches to help on a windbreak, but we're having some branch damage that we've cut out. And really the trees are so mature that they're probably going to start declining on us, and therefore we've dug up some cedar seedlings out of a field that someone wanted to get rid of, and we're planting them on the other side in between the trees to let them go ahead and get established. So we're kind of thinking in the future here because the trees are so mature. Now, as far as the birds, it doesn't have to be evergreen trees. It can be deciduous ones. So we have the eastern red cedar, but you can use things like elms, hackberries, oaks, and magnolias. All make nice landscape attractions and are great coverage and food sources in many cases for the birds. Now, the next layer that I want to go into is kind of our smaller trees, medium-sized trees, and we're going to go back in here where it's shaded a little bit, so it may be kind of difficult to see all of it, but there's a reason for that. And what we're doing is putting in a dogwood, just a native dogwood out of Oklahoma. Now, we're kind of pushing the limitations here in Stillwater because of wind, and that's why we want it under a lot of shade here. It's going to get pretty much heavy shade with a little bit of filtered sun, but hopefully some windbreak. And not only will the dogwood provide us with beautiful spring flowers, we've planted it in the appropriate depth and everything, but it's going to have some fruit later on that the birds are going to love too. So dogwood is a nice example of kind of a medium, small tree. And there's all kinds of things to keep in mind again, but you need to think just typically of any landscape design. Are you putting it in shade, sun, part shade, and that will help, as well as where you're located in Oklahoma. So we've put in a dogwood that helps both of us in the right condition where it will be happy. Now, right over here is really considered a shrub in many cases, but it can be a large shrub or considered as a small tree. Now, we've moved out, notice we're on the south side of the trees, so it's going to get a little bit more sunlight, and that's just perfect for a deciduous holly, which I have here. And deciduous means that the holly loses its leaves in the wintertime. But when it does, it's absolutely loaded with red berries that are very beautiful for us in the landscape, and the birds like them, and it's a great shrubby type growth that the birds like to land in. Now, this particular cultivar is called Warren's Red. It's actually devised right here in Oklahoma, out of Oklahoma City at Warren's Nursery. It's a sport off of a plant that they had. They've propagated it, got it named, and now it's been introduced into the industry. And one of its positive characteristics are that the berries are held on pretty much all winter long or until the birds eat them up. Now, one like this can be kind of expensive, but you notice we have a smaller one here that's really more cost affordable, and they're pretty moderate in their growth rate, so it won't take us too long to get some growth on them berries. And if you were to look up closer, you'll see that it's just getting ready to bloom and going to be loaded again with berries. But the thing you need to remember with hollies, they're male and female plants. This is a female, so we're going to have a male to cross-pollinate to get our fruit. Now, a lot of hollies are grown in landscapes, whether they're evergreen or deciduous, and that will help. But for a little bit of extra protection, we planted right over here again in the sun a cultivar that is a true male cultivar called Gem Dandy, and it's often referred to as winterberry, but it will have male flowers that will help pollinate ours, so we'll get better fruiting production and berries on our shrubs. So again, nice for the birds and nice for us in the landscape, but we've thought about the height we're going to get and the sunlight that it needs to grow. Now next we'd go a little bit closer to the ground with some of our smaller shrubs, and these are actually flowering quince, also deciduous. The cultivar is cameo. We had those planted in another landscape bed that was a little bit more formal garden, but they got a little bit too big over the years for that particular bed and were growing out in the lawn. So we transplanted them about a month ago, just bare root. They've transplanted nicely. Again, they need a little bit more sun, so we've got them on the south side. But you can see they're really a great substitute for us here in the Stillwater area for an azalea because they have beautiful spring blossoms. And they're also a little bit thorny, so the birds can hide and protect in them. Good coverage for them. And a little extra bonus would be some possible fruit that would come on later on. Not all of them put the fruit on. If you don't use them for jams or jellies, they'll deteriorate and the birds will eat them too. And then behind me, another low-growing one is an Oregon grape mahonia, or holly it's sometimes referred to. This particular one also has nice flowers, berries for the birds, but it's a little bit more of a running type. It will spread through here kind of as a ground cover, but a little bit taller versus some of the traditional mahonia. So again, we've got a lower coverage, some really nice added benefits right here on the south side of our landscape. Well, dandelions may not be one of your favorites in your lawn, but I tell you, the birds actually love them. Birds like native sparrows, buntings, and finches. And really, that is our next category, which is the ground cover category, or the smallest category, about plants 12 inches or under. So really, dandelions, as they flower and mature the seeds, the birds really like them. Now, we're fortunate enough, again, back here, that we allow the dandelions just to kind of go because it's not a high maintenance area. We kind of have it naturalized with a woodland garden, so we really aren't too concerned about the dandelions, and it's always too windy back in this area for us to even try to spray, so we just kind of let them grow, and then in other areas try to get the grass to actually smother them out. But we always have a few, and again, they're a nice ground cover for the birds to use. And we'll also be able to use things like Virginia creeper, and we'll put in some annual flowers and other things that will attract annuals. So if you don't like dandelions, you don't have to grow them on tension because there's other options as well. Now there's also some other things that are not really plant material related but practice related that will help attract birds to the landscape. And notice right here beside me how thick we have some of the mulch here. Mulch, from a horticultural standpoint, is great because it helps keep the weeds out a little bit more under here. We don't have to worry about getting under the tree and mowing and raising the branches off. But also it helps moderate soil temperature and hold in moisture, which is very nice. But also the birds, especially like robins, will love to come in here and scratch around, and you can get it too thick sometimes where it makes it hard for them to get in there. But in some of our shallower mulched areas, we see all kinds of robins scratching for grubs and various insects in the soil, so that's really a nice added benefit. Now another thing that we've added over here, and I tell you, when we were hauling those in yesterday, people really thought we were crazy. We were getting all kinds of strange looks in the truck. But we went out to a pasture where some people were trying to clean it up so they can maintain their pasture a little bit more, and we hauled in what is called snags. And right over here is a snag that we've angled, and it's pretty solid, this particular one. But a snag is really a tree that's fallen down, and it's just starting to decay, but the birds love it because insects will harbor in here and they'll feed on them, especially woodpeckers, and sometimes they'll make their nest in them. And it really looks almost like petrified wood, and it has almost an artistic value in our landscape here, depending on what your personal preference is. Now, another location over here with some of our cedars, we had 2 central leaders, and one of them actually died out. And instead of cutting it out like we traditionally would want to do, we left it again for the birds to use. And so again, it looks kind of awkward until you understand the viewpoint of it, and then it really blends in nicely now that we've added some more. And also during the snowstorm, we found, I guess, really like a scrub oak that had split off at the base. So there's a few buds that were trying to swell, but obviously it would die on us. And we've just laid this on the ground here because, again, as leaves congregate in it, needles, the birds will use it for protection, and it makes a nice windbreak. Plus we'll plant some lower growing things in front of it, make it a little bit more aesthetic. Also, just hauling in rocks like this is a nice added benefit because it adds a little bit of an aesthetic value to it, but it will make a nice habitat for some of the birds that like to stay on the ground a little bit, and maybe some other critters too. But again, get permission on that, because some people feel like moving rocks will disturb other natural habitats for other smaller insects and stuff. So be careful on how you're collecting those. Now, I'd like to give you a few more tips on some things that would be real important in the process of establishing a habitat. First of all, anytime you're trying to get more wildlife, you got to monitor your pesticide use, because if you spray too much, you're going to distract, possibly kill and harm or discourage birds and various insect predators coming in. Also, if you have cats in the landscape, obviously they're going to be enjoying this kind of a wildlife habitat because they're going to have more birds for them to try to feed on. So you may have to keep the cats inside more, or put a bell around their collar to kind of distract or alarm the birds that they're coming. And also just dry, dusty areas, like some of our roads here, the birds love to take dry dust baths. And then even muddy areas, the swallows will use that to make their nests. So there's all kinds of things that really play an important role in the aesthetic value and just in the traditional landscape. And just because we put this in today doesn't mean we're going to have birds here tomorrow. You need to allow for it to mature, and so it's going to take some time, and we have to be very patient for the birds to come in and use it. Now, furthermore, with a habitat like this, there's supplemental things to remember. We've talked about putting up our bird houses, our nesting boxes. You can give them supplemental feed with feeders, which we'll talk about more. And remember the water part with water gardens and bird baths. And all of those things are to come with future segments. But I think the most exciting thing is that we're going to be visiting various landscapes across the state this year that have established mature backyard habitats, some that are very small and some that are very large. And I think you'll enjoy sticking around with us the next few months, because we'll be visiting and bringing more ideas too. So start planning your backyard habitat, either small or large. There's all kinds of nice options and beautiful plant material that will make your landscape very attractive.